Hello there, welcome back. Hope you're doing fine. So, in this session, we'll be continuing with a discussion on PHP. This session is all about establishing a database connection with MySQL database from PHP. And after establishing the connection, we're going to look at inserting a record, updating a record, deleting a record, selecting a record, or searching records within the table. So, before even starting off with our connection activities, there is one thing that we have to understand. What is the extension we are going to use for establishing this connection from PHP to MySQL? So we are going to use this MySQLi extension for establishing a connection with the MySQL database. What is this MySQLi? MySQLi, I'm saying it's an extension and it is nothing but it is a class. We all know what's a class in object-oriented programming. MySQLi is a class. MySQLi has some data members. What a class has data members and some methods. So you can think of MySQLi to be a class in PHP which has got some data members like error number, like this. Some data members we are going to have. And we are going to have some methods for this class. I'm just writing some methods here, like close can be a method, and it has also a constructor. So MySQLi as a constructor. We all know what's a constructor. It's a parameterized constructor that takes up the host name. So these are the parameters that we'll pass: host name, and then the username for your database, password for your database, and finally the database name. So MySQLi is a class. It has got some attributes. It has got some methods. You can think of query to be another method, prepare to be another method. So we have a lot of methods. So MySQLi is a class. So from PHP, if you want to connect to a database, what you should create is you should create an instance of the MySQLi class, or else we can say create an object first. So you pass the parameters to the constructor, create an MySQLi object. After creating the object, you can access the methods. Say, if I create an object of MySQLi class and I call it $connection, how I can access a variable? I have to use the object operator and then the variable name. If there is an error with the connection, the error attribute will be populated with the error code and the error message. Say if I want to execute a method or call a method, I'll use the object name and then the object operator. The method name is query. Say this method takes in the SQL query as an input. So you can write the SQL query as a string here, or you can pass it as a variable. So MySQLi is an extension that comes with PHP versions greater than 5. So you're going to have this MySQLi object getting created by passing the info to its constructor, and you can access the attributes and the methods of MySQLi object to perform the operations on the database. For instance, if I call the query method, I'll be able to pass my SQL query as a string and execute the query on the database. And to bind parameters to my query, I'll be using the prepare method. Close is for closing the connection. So that's how we start establishing a connection with the database and start working with the database. With this small introduction on MySQLi, let me show you the PHP manual that contains the source code for MySQLi. So here is this class, and as I told you, you have a lot of attributes defined for your MySQLi class, and it is also a constructor. This is the constructor wherein you pass host name, username, password, and database name. When you're creating an object of type MySQLi, we should pass the data for this parameterized constructor and create an object. And MySQLi has got support for transaction management too. So you can see some auto commit, begin transaction, and transaction based queries, rollback commit can be done using MySQLi extension. And that is one of the advantages. And another thing is it has also methods for, I told you it has a close method. It returns a Boolean value, true or false, with respect to closing a connection with the database. And you're having this execute query method, which will be executing a query against the database. And it will also be binding parameters to the query. That is one method for executing query. The another method for executing a query is the query method itself wherein we can directly execute the query by passing the query as a string to this method, and it returns a boolean value when you perform insert update, and it returns a MySQLi result object when you're performing an select operation on the table. We also have this prepare method, which is used for again binding parameters to the query and executing a query. And you also have methods related to transaction processing like rollback, save point, and all those things. So MySQLi, in short, is a class. It has got some data members. What are the data members? Affected rows. Once when you establish the connection and you run some update query, it just has the number of rows that got affected in this attribute. If there is any issue with the connection, the error attributes are getting populated with the data on the issues with the connection. You can very well access these attributes of this object and throw the issues to the user. And all these fields you're seeing here: host info, server version, protocol version. Info is about the MySQL database that's running. What's the server version of your MySQL database? What is the protocol version? And what is the host info wherein your MySQL database is running? So these attributes, after you establish the connection, will hold the data about all these things. So in short, when you're trying to establish a connection to your database from PHP, what is that you have to do? Pass the parameters to the constructor, create an object, and then if it's an error, you can use the attributes to show what the error is. If there is no error, you can use the methods for executing the query on the database. And how you call a method? You use the object operator, method name, pass the arguments. And if the query is successful, finally, you will call the close method to close the connection to the database. So we'll be using our MySQLi extension for all our demonstrations in this session. Let's start with establishing a connection with the database. Let's open a connection. After we establish the connection, let's close it. Let's start with the demo now. In the very first demonstration, we'll be taking a look at how to establish a connection with the MySQL database. So I've already installed MySQL. It's running on my laptop. It's listening in port number 3306. So I have used XAMPP for installation of Apache Web Server and MySQL. Right now, the task is we need to connect to our MySQL server. So how to perform that? So this is about establishing a connection to MySQL from PHP. So for this, I'm going to use two functions. The first function is going to be on opening a connection. It's going to open a connection to the database, and it will return this connection object of type MySQLi. What we are performing here is this function will establish a connection by creating an object of type MySQLi, and it will be returning this object. So this function will return an object of type MySQLi. So let's code this function. We call this function open connection. And what is our objective here is to create a connection with the database. For this, we need to pass some parameters. We should say what is the host name. Let me call that DB host. The host name, local host. So where my MySQL server is running it's on the local host. And who is the user? Who is the user who is going to connect to the database? I'm connecting as the root user. And I have not given any passwords here. So if you have any passwords, you can give db pass. Some variable you can declare, you can give your passwords here. But I'm not having a password for my database. So I'm not having this attribute. And to which database you're going to connect on the server, the database name. I have created a database by name Satish. So I'm going to use this database for connection. And now the next step is we should create this connection. We'll call that object to be $connection. And how you create an object of type MySQLi? It's a class, right? So you call MySQLi, new MySQLi, and then you pass all these parameters. First comes the host name, DB host, and next comes the user, $DB user. And you can also pass the a password. Since I don't have a password, I'm not giving anything here. And finally, you will pass the database to which you're connecting. We can also have some error handling here. So if there is an issue with the connection, we can give this message that is connection failed, and we can display what is the issue. So we'll just call this parameter from our MySQLi class, that is $connection error. So this is going to be shown to the user as part of the error. So this is our function. What is this function performing here? This function is creating an object of type MySQLi, and then if the connection is successful, it returns that object, or else it exits the script with the error message. So we are calling this attribute, which is part of MySQLi class, and we are throwing that back to the user. And how you return this? You return $connection. So we are returning the connection object here. So that is for opening a connection. Likewise, we'll also have a function for closing the connection. So it's a function for close connection. And the use of this function is just to call this close method from our MySQLi object. And how you invoke this method of this MySQLi classes, you use the object operator and then the object that we are using here. So when you're closing the connection, we should pass the object. So we'll call this $connection. So how you close a connection? See, you have created an object of MySQLi. You're passing that object, calling the method for that object, and we are closing the connection. Now let's try opening a connection and closing a connection. Say we'll call this method open connection. So this is going to open the connection and return to us an object. We'll call this $connection object. So this is the connection, and if everything is fine, we'll echo this, that is connected to the database successfully. So this is our connection, and we'll also close the connection by calling close connection. So we'll pass this object which you have created for closing the connection. So that's it. That's how you establish a connection with the MySQL database from PHP. Two things we have done. One is we have written this function for opening a connection. It creates an object of type MySQLi. The parameters we are passing here are the host name, the username, the password you can pass, but since I don't have a password, I'm not giving anything here, and the database to which you're going to connect. If there is any issue, we'll populate the error attribute from the connection object, and then we'll exit the script. If there are no issues, we'll return the connection object. So close connection is another function wherein we are getting the connection object and calling the method. Close is a method inside the MySQLi class, and we are just calling the method for this object, and we are closing the connection. So here is the function call. So open connection returns an object. We are capturing it here, displaying the message to the user, and close connection is used for closing the connection. And you have to pass the object which you have created to close the connection. Let's check whether this code works. Let's go to test.php. Connected to the database successfully. So we have successfully connected to our database. So when you're working with the database, you have to first open the connection, get the connection object, and then you'll be using the methods of the connection object for executing queries and getting data back from the MySQL server. Now let's take a look at the next demonstration, that is on this demonstration is on inserting a record into the employee table in the MySQL database. So here is my database. I have given my name Satish here. So the database I've created is Satish, and the table I have created is employee table. You can see the fields of the employee table. We have employee ID to be of type character, name to be of variable length character, phone number to be of character, salary to be of int, join date is of type date, and address is of type varchar. And I have established employee ID to be the primary key, name to be not null, and phone number to be unique, and salary to have a check constraint, that is only greater than 0 is accepted in the salary column, and address by default will be Vellore. So I have established all these constraints. If you're not clear about how to create tables using MySQL, or how to establish constraints or work with joins in MySQL, please refer to my lecture on messing with MySQL, wherein I have given a quick tutorials on all these concepts. So here is my table, and the objective here is from PHP, I should be inserting a record into this table. Now you can see there are no records from here. Select star from employee. I'm not going to get any records. It's an empty set. Now let's see how to insert a record. As usual, we are going to have these two functions for opening and closing a connection. So everything happens after we open a connection. So this is the place wherein we have opened the connection. After opening the connection, we should define our SQL query. Say let's define the SQL query as a string here. The SQL query for inserting a record into the database is insert into the table name values. What values you're going to insert? We'll insert the employee ID. It's a character, so let's give some employee ID in quotes. And employee name, I'll give my name Satish. And employee phone number, let's give some dummy numbers here. It's also character. Then we have employees salary. Let's enter the salary as some 10,000. Join date for the employee, we have to give that in quotes, say 20, 21, 12, 24, something like that. And employee address, we'll give that to be Chennai. So you're going to have this query. Now, the next thing is we should pass this string as a parameter to one of the methods in the MySQLi class. So what is that method we are going to call from the MySQLi classes is the query method. And this query method will be getting in our string, the SQL query. And how will you invoke a method from the MySQLi class? We'll use the object operator. And the object we have created that represents the MySQLi class is the connection object. This is how you pass this query to the method, that is the query method that is present inside your MySQLi object. And what is this method going to return is, it's going to return true or false. So if it returns true, then your query is successful. We're going to check whether this query returns true. If it returns true, then we can say echo record inserted successfully in the database. Else, if it returns false, we can just populate the error message to the user. We can say echo there is an error with the insert, and we can just give the error as usual. We call the parameter from the MySQLi object, that is error. And after that, we'll be closing the connection by passing the connection object. So this is with respect to inserting a record. What is that we have to do? We should first open the connection. So we'll echo a new line here. We'll just give a break tag so that every thing that is getting printed on the screen is on a new line. So we have opened the connection and we created this string which contains a SQL query. $SQL represents the insert query. We are inserting certain values into the employee table. And the next thing we are performing is we are calling the query method from our MySQLi object, and we are passing our query as a string. And if this method returns true, it means the record has been successfully inserted in the database. Else there is an error. We are populating the error attribute from a MySQLi object. And finally, we are closing our connection. Let's check whether this, let's save all. Let's check whether this code works. Let's go to our test.php. So connected to the database successfully, record inserted successfully in the database. Let's check the record, select star from employee. Here is a record. So employee ID, name, phone number, salary, and join date and address. So we have successfully completed our next assignment, that is inserting a record into the MySQL database from PHP. I hope you are following the concepts. Let's take a few more exercises like updating a record, deleting a record, and then we'll see selecting records from the table. So we have seen how to insert record into the database. The next assignment will be to update a record, an existing record in the database. So we'll update the name field. Maybe we'll update name Satish to Matthew for the employee ID 12456. How to update and record in the database. That is our next demonstration. So this demo is on updating a record in the database. So even for update, the same things are to be followed. You have to open a connection, close the connection. So we are opening the connection and we'll check whether we are connected to the database. Now the query changes. Now it's not insert, it's going to be update. So we'll write the query for update. So we are updating, the table name is employee, set the name of the employee to be, say we'll update Satish as Matthew, where employee ID, what is the employee ID? It's 12456. So for this employee ID, we are going to update the name from Satish to Matthew. And we are taking this query, passing it to the query method of the MySQLi object as usual. If this method returns true after executing the query on the database, then we say record updated successfully on the database. Else there is an error, as usual populate the error attribute from the MySQLi object, close the connection. Let's execute this. Let's check whether our record gets updated. Refresh the page. So record updated successfully in the database. So we'll check our database. Let's select staff from employee. You're able to see earlier we had the name to be Satish. Now we have updated the name to Matthew using the employee ID, which is a primary key in the database. So update works exactly like insert, only the query is different, and then the record gets updated in the database. Hope you're able to follow update. Now let's take a look at the next activity, that is deleting a record from the database. How do you delete a record from the database using the employee ID? For this, let's go to a code. The next activity we are going to take up is delete a record from the database using the employee ID. Here we are using the primary key, employee ID, in the employee table. So for delete, again the same concepts. When you're working with a database, you have to open the connection, get the object. So we are opening the connection, getting the object. The query is different here. We are not going to update it. We are going to delete the record. So it is delete from employee. The query is delete from employee, where employee ID is equal to 12456. Pass the query as a string to the query method of this object. If this method returns true, then record deleted successfully in the database, or else populate the error, close the database connection. Again, delete follows the same pattern as we did for update and insert. Only thing is the query is a different query. We're calling the same method, passing the query as a string, and then we are executing the query on the database. If the method returns a true, then the record is successfully deleted. Let's check the output for this. So record deleted successfully in the database. Did we really delete it? Let's check. Select staff from employee again. Yeah, now our result is empty set. So we have seen how to delete a record. We have seen three important things: inserting a record, updating a record, and deleting a record. Next, what we are going to see is selecting a record from the MySQL database. Select is a little different. When I perform select staff from employee, I'm going to get an entire table structure being written from the database. Now, how is that we are going to traverse through this table structure, go row by row, and print all the values inside the table to the user will be our next assignment. The next demonstration we are going to take up is selecting records from a table. So we will select employee ID, that is the column name in the table. So we'll be selecting employee ID, that is a column name for employee ID in the table, and name of all the employees from the employee table. So this is the demonstration. We're going to select many rows from the table, all the employee IDs and names of employees from the table. So what I have done to my employee is I have inserted certain records into my table. So my table has got 3 records now. So we're going to fetch the employee IDs and names of all the employees from this table. What is going to be returned is a table structure. We're going to have some rows and then columns. So 2 columns, and we have 3 rows of data. Now select query returns us a table structure, and how is that we are going to manage that within our PHP code is our challenge. Let's go to the demonstration. So whenever you're working with the database, open the connection, close the connection to functions as usual, create the connection, get the object of type MySQLi. So you're going to open the connection and you're going to get this connection object return. So connected to the database successfully is the message. After connection, we're going to select records from the table. So the query here changes. It's not delete. The query is, we're going to select only two columns, employee ID and name from employee table. So we select employee ID and names of all the employees from the table. The method we are going to use from a MySQLi object is query method, and we'll pass the string as usual. So SQL string is passed here. And how you invoke that? Connection, object operator, the method and the string. Now, there are certain things we need to take care of before executing this method. We should understand what this method returns. This method returns an object, that is another object it returns. We'll call that object to be $result. So it's not returning a true or false, it's going to return another object. So $result is another object. It's of type MySQLi underscore result. When I say an object, it is an instance of a class. And what is this result object all about? Let me give a comment here. Result is an object, or else we can say it's an instance of the MySQLi result class. So we have a class, inbuilt class in this MySQLi extension, which is MySQLi result class. So this object is an instance of this class. We'll take a look at that particular MySQLi result class. So you have this class called MySQLi result, and it has got certain attributes. Num rows tells you how many number of rows have been returned from the table. So here, when we are performing select EID, name from employee, how many rows are getting returned? This is one row. This is the second row, 3 rows. So num rows is an attribute of that object, which tells you how many rows are getting returned from the table. So $result actually maps onto an instance of MySQLi result, and when this object is returned, the num rows field will have the number of rows returned from the table, and there are certain methods for this object. That is, we'll be looking at one specific method, fetch associate. So every row from the table is fetched and returned as an associative array. So we'll see what is this method, fetch associate. So fetch associative array, this method, what it does is it returns every row from the table as an associative array. See, we all know what is an associative array, right? See, when you take a look at the table, you have EID to be the key and this is the value, name to be the key and this is the value. So it fetches every row as an associative array. I'll just type the syntax for an associative array here, like you have EID and here you have 1, 2, 4, 5, 6. Likewise, you have employee name and then you have employee name to be Satish. So this is an associative array. So first row is like this. And if you want to print the data out, what you're going to do, say you call this array to be $row. If you want to print the data for the values using the keys, how is that you're going to print? You're going to use $row and then you're going to use the keys, right? You pass EID. So what will be the value printed here? 1, 2, 4, 5, 6. And then you want to print the name, you're going to call the array name. And then you're going to give a name. So name is the key. So what will be printed to the user? Satish will be printed. So every row is written like an associative array like this. Of course, there are certain syntax that you have to have here. So you can refer to my lecture on associative arrays just to get an understanding of what is being returned from the table when you are using this specific method, fetch underscore associative. So this is what is happening. It's fetching the first row. The key is EID. The value is 1, 2, 4, 5, 6. The key is name. The value is Satish. After the first row, we are going to the next row. The key is EID. The value is 1, 2, 4, 5, 7. The key is name. The value is Matthew. So this is the next associative array. And the third associative array that is getting built is the key is EID. the value is 12458, the key is name, and the value is Chris. So every row is fetched as an associative array. And who is helping us with this? This specific method, fetch underscore ASSOC, this specific method which is present in your MySQLi result object. So you can see here, this is the method inside this object which is fetching every row as an associative array. That's why we are handling, let me delete this. That's why we are handling this result as an object of type MySQLi underscore result. So whenever you're selecting records or when you're selecting multiple rows from a table, you have to return it as a MySQLi result object. That is by default, it's returning an object. And how you handle that object is the next question. So first check we are going to perform here is, we are going to check this attribute. If $result, we'll use the object operator, and then the attribute is num rows. So this is the attribute num rows, whether num rows is greater than 0. What it means, we are going to go through this operation of fetching every row from the table only when the number of rows written from the table is greater than 0. Sometimes the table may be empty, right? Then no need to perform all these operations. The next thing what we are going to do is we are going to go with a while loop. We are going to fetch every row. We'll call every row from the table as $row. And how is that you're going to fetch is $result is the object, and the method we are going to invoke is fetch associative, fetch underscore associative array. So this is the method that we are calling. And what this method does is it fetches every row as an associative array, and that is being mapped to $row. When I call $row of EID, it will print the value for the first row. That is the employee ID value for the first row. And then $row of name will print the name value for the first row. Like that, we are going through every row. That is the meaning here. And how is that we are printing? We'll echo these values. That is EID. EID is nothing but we are concatenating $row, and then we are passing the key EID. So that is the employee ID. The next thing we are going to concatenate is we're going to have this employee name for the employee. So it is denoted as $. It's $row. Again, the key we are going to use here is name. That's it. So we'll print every row in a new line. Maybe we can concatenate that with a break tag, with an HTML break tag. Okay. So if the number of rows is greater than 0, we go through every row. We get every row as an associative array. We are using the keys. The key is the column name. Employee ID is the key, and name is the key for every row that is being fetched. If the number of rows is not greater than 0, it means there are no rows from the table. So we'll echo there are no rows in the table. So only when the table has got some rows, we are going to go through every row and then print it, or else we'll say there are no rows in the table. So what we have seen with respect to selecting records from a table, only thing is we have written the query for selecting employee ID and name from the employee table. And what is returned is actually an object. This object is of type MySQLi underscore result. And MySQLi underscore result is a class. Just a quick look at it. So MySQLi underscore result is a class, and this class has got num rows, which tells you how many rows of data is getting written from the table. And this class, and in this class, we are using this method fetch associative array, and this method actually helps us in bringing every row from the table as an associative array. So we'll now go back to our code. We'll execute this. Let's check whether our output is getting printed on the screen. So here is the data. Employee ID is 1245, name is Satish. Employee ID is 12457, name is Matthew. Employee ID is 12458 and name is Chris. So we are able to bring the employee ID name for all the employees and print that on the screen. So we have finished understanding selecting records from a table. Now let us take a look at this demo on searching records from the table using a key or using a parameter. We'll say we'll pass some parameter and then we'll search. So how do you search for certain records from the table? By passing a parameter. Again, open a connection, close connection. These two functions are standard. We are opening the connection, and here we are connected to the database successfully. Next, we are going to search and bring the employee ID and names of employees whose address, say where address is equal to Chennai. So only employees from Chennai, I want their names and IDs to be displayed on the screen. When you take a look at my table, I have inserted some records here. So there are two employees who are from Chennai. I want only the employee ID and name of employees who are from Chennai. So we're going to get two rows of data and two columns of data that is going to be returned. So again, you're going to have rows and columns of data that can be returned when you're running a search query. So for this, how to handle this? It's going to be the same way like you handled a select query earlier. So you're going to pass the search query here. And if the number of rows returned is greater than 0, so you're going to get an object getting returned because we're having rows and columns of data that is actually getting returned by this query. Please keep in mind when you're running a query, and if you're sure that it's going to return rows and columns of data, what is that you're going to handle is you're going to handle an object of type MySQLI underscore result. And you're going to check whether the number of rows returned is greater than 0. If it has returned greater than 0, then you fetch every row as an associative array and you use the keys of that associative array to print the values for every row. And if the number of rows is not greater than 0, there are no rows in the table, close the connection. Exactly like what you did with selecting records from the table. Here we are selecting it based on a condition. That's it. Let's execute this. Let's see whether we are getting the output on the screen. Yes, we have only two employees. One is Satish and one is Ram, who are from Chennai. Is that data correct? So we have Satish and we have Ram, who are from Chennai. So we have learned a lot of concepts in this session. That we have learned how to open a connection with the DB, how to insert a record, how to update a record, how to delete a record, how to select records, how to select an entire table back from the database, and how to handle it as an object. And then we also seen how to select records using parameters, say selecting records of employees who are from Chennai. In the next session, we'll be looking at how to use a simple form. We'll code an HTML form. We'll ask the user to enter the data through the form. We'll get the data inside our PHP code, and then we'll establish a connection to the database, and we will transfer the data from PHP to our servers. So we'll be looking at how to get data input through forms and update the database. So that will be the focus for our discussion in the next session. With that, we are coming to an end of this session. If you have any questions, please leave your comments below. And I hope you are able to follow all these concepts. Thank you all for listening. Take care.